Most people who are affected by AI anxiety at work don't know they have it. Not because they're unaware, because the way it actually shows up in real behavior on real workdays looks almost nothing like what most people picture when they hear the phrase AI anxiety. It doesn't look like panic. It doesn't look like spiraling. It doesn't look like anything that would get flagged in a performance review. It looks like being busy. It looks like having other priorities. It looks like being a practical person who doesn't have time for things that aren't immediately useful. And if you clicked on this video, there's a reasonable chance that at least one thing in the next few minutes is going to sound like a description of your last several months, not a judgment of them. A description. What this video does is name 7 specific behavioral patterns. Things that show up in real professional lives, in real workdays, that are the actual signature of AI anxiety in people who would never describe themselves as anxious about AI. By the end of it, you'll have a name for something that may have been running in the background for longer than you realized, and you'll know exactly what to do with that name. So here's why this is so hard to spot. When most people think about AI anxiety, they picture something dramatic. The person who is visibly stressed, who talks about it constantly, who refreshes the news about layoffs every morning. That version exists. But it's not the most common version. The more common version is quieter. It's a low-grade recalibration of behavior that happens gradually, beneath the level of conscious awareness. So gradually that the person doing it never registers it as a response to anything. They're not anxious. They're just making reasonable decisions. They're not avoiding. They're just prioritizing. They're not falling behind. They're just busy right now. The research on avoidance behavior is consistent on this point. The behaviors that protect us from anxiety are almost always invisible to us as protective behaviors. They feel like choices, practical, reasonable choices. The anxiety they're protecting us from stays invisible because the avoidance is working. What that means for AI specifically is this. A professional who is experiencing genuine anxiety about their relevance in an AI-transformed workplace may go months, even a year, without ever thinking the words, "I'm anxious about AI," because they're too busy making reasonable decisions to notice the pattern those decisions form. So here are 7 of those patterns. Not to judge them, to name them. Sign 1. You've opened an AI tool at least once, probably more than once, typed something, looked at the results, and quietly concluded that it wasn't really useful for what you actually do, and then you closed it. And haven't gone back. This is the most common entry point. And the conclusion, this isn't for someone like me, feels completely reasonable, because the first output genuinely wasn't useful. What most people don't know is that this is almost universally true for first attempts. AI tools were not designed to be evaluated on a single try. They were designed for iteration, for a back and forth that feels natural once you know what you're building. The first output isn't the tool's answer, it's the tool's opening question. But if you closed the tab before that became clear, the conclusion you drew felt accurate, and it's been operating as a fact ever since. Sign 2. In meetings where AI comes up, and it comes up more than it used to, you participate in the conversation. You nod. You ask a reasonable question occasionally. You do not, under any circumstances, reveal the specific gap between what's being discussed and what you actually understand. This one is almost universal among experienced professionals, and it is exhausting in a way that's hard to explain, because it happens in a register that's below the level of language. It's the background work of performing competence while managing uncertainty. The exhaustion it produces doesn't show up as, "I'm tired because of AI meetings." It shows up as general fatigue, end-of-day depletion. A vague sense that work requires more than it used to. Sign 3. You've subscribed to at least one AI newsletter, course, or resource, and haven't opened it in weeks. Or you've bookmarked articles about AI tools that you're planning to read when things slow down. Things haven't slowed down. This pattern has a specific name in the psychology of avoidance: preparation as substitute for action. The act of subscribing, bookmarking, or downloading creates a genuine sense of forward motion, without requiring contact with the thing being avoided. The folder of saved articles is not a library. It's evidence of an intention that hasn't been able to become a behavior yet. Here's what's important about signs 1, 2, and 3 together. None of them feel like avoidance. They feel like the behavior of a practical person who tried, who is staying informed, who just hasn't had the bandwidth yet. That's not denial. That's exactly what intelligent avoidance feels like from the inside. Now, 4 through 7. Sign 4. There is at least one person in your professional circle, a colleague, someone more junior, someone in a different department, whose comfort with AI tools produces a feeling in you that isn't quite envy and isn't quite resentment, but lives somewhere near both of them. You don't linger on it. But it's there. That feeling has a specific function. It's measuring distance. Your nervous system is doing math, gauging a gap that it has decided matters, and the output of that calculation is the feeling. The feeling isn't a verdict, it's a signal. And right now, the signal is just running in the background, unattended. Sign 5. You are working harder than you need to on tasks that you privately suspect. I could do faster. Not because you don't know. I could help. Because starting that process, figuring out how exactly to apply it to this specific thing, requires a kind of activation energy that isn't available right now. So you do the task the way you've always done it, which is completely functional, which produces completely competent results, which doesn't require anything from you that you don't already have. The efficiency gap that creates is real, but it stays invisible because the work gets done. Sign 6. When you do open an AI tool, which happens occasionally, usually after something external prompts it, there's a specific moment just before you type something where something tightens. It's not panic. It's more like the feeling of being evaluated, because on some level the prompt you're about to write is going to produce output that tells you something about whether you know how to use this. And the result of that experiment feels higher stakes than it should. So the prompt you write is either too vague, so the output's failure is the tool's fault, or you close the window before writing anything at all. This is the loop that keeps the loop going. The anxiety about doing it wrong prevents the repetition that would make it feel normal. Sign 7. At some point in the last several months, maybe more than once, you've had a thought that arrived quietly and left quickly, that you didn't name or examine, that went something like, I don't know if what I'm good at is still what matters. Not as a spiral, not as a crisis, just as a passing thing. That thought is worth pausing on, because it's the most honest signal in the list, and it's usually the one that's been running the longest. So here's the question that matters. Why is this pattern so hard to see from inside it? Because every single one of those signs has a completely reasonable explanation when it's standing alone. The first time you tried the tool and it didn't work, that's just an accurate assessment of a first experience. The nodding in meetings, that's professionalism. The saved articles, that's intention. The tightening before you type, that's just not being in the mood right now. Each one, separately, is a reasonable story. It's only when you see them together that the shape becomes visible. And the shape isn't laziness. It isn't technological incompetence. It isn't a character flaw or a generational limitation or evidence that your best professional years are behind you. The shape is this: a competent professional, someone who built real expertise over real years, is experiencing the completely predictable psychological response to a genuinely unprecedented rate of change. The research on this is unambiguous. The people who feel the most disoriented by AI disruption are disproportionately the people who built the most, because they have the most to recalibrate, because the ground moved furthest beneath them. There is a grief in this that almost no professional conversation makes room for. The grief of having built something real, something measurably competent, and then having the rules that made that competence legible change faster than any individual could have prepared for. That grief is not sentimentality. It is the appropriate response to a real loss. The loss of certainty, of stable ground, of a career arc that was tracking the way it was supposed to track. And the 7 signs on this list, they're not evidence that you failed to adapt. They're evidence that you're human, that your nervous system is doing exactly what nervous systems do when the environment sends signals that something important has changed and the path forward isn't clear yet. That's not a technology problem. That's a recognition problem, and you just solved the recognition part. If what just landed is the recognition, the "I didn't know that was what that was," there's something in the description built for exactly what comes next. Not an AI tutorial, not a tool list, a guided audio and workbook that works specifically on the psychological layer this video just named, the block that sits underneath the avoidance, and that no amount of information about AI tools actually reaches. It's called the AI Shame Reset. The link is in the description and in the pinned comment. So here's what actually changes now. Not a 10-step plan. Not a course to enroll in. One thing. Specific, completable, and small enough to do before Friday. Open Claude, or ChatGPT, whichever you have, and find one piece of writing from your actual job from the last 2 weeks. A report, an email thread, a summary you wrote, a document you produced. Paste it in and type this. What are the 3 things someone reading this would most want to know first? That's the whole instruction. Don't evaluate the output against a standard. Don't decide yet whether this is useful or not useful. Just notice what comes back. Because the goal of this first step isn't to learn AI. It isn't to close the gap. It isn't even to save time. The goal is to have one real interaction with the tool in the context of work you actually did, so that the next time you're about to close the tab, you have a data point instead of a blank. The reason this works when other first steps don't is that it requires nothing you don't already have. You don't need to know how AI works. You don't need to learn prompting. You don't need to be a tech person, and that's actually not the point. You need a piece of writing you already produced, and 8 minutes. That's not AI adoption. That's finding out whether one specific thing is useful for the work you actually do. Everything else comes after that answer. And if the output is wrong or generic or not quite right, that's not failure. That's the tool asking a follow-up question. You're allowed to type another sentence. That's the whole mechanic. If the pattern this video named is something you want to address at its root, not with more information about AI, but with the specific thing that's actually been blocking it, the AI shame reset is in the description and the pinned comment. It's the next step if the recognition just landed. Which of the 7 signs landed hardest? And when was the last time you saw it show up in your actual workday? So here's what's actually true at the end of this. You came in not identifying as someone with AI anxiety. You may be leaving with a different read on the last several months. That's not a bad thing. That's the only thing that makes the next part possible, because here's what the 7 signs, taken together, actually tell you. You are not someone who lacks the capacity to adapt. You are someone whose nervous system is doing its job, protecting you from repeated contact with something that has felt evaluative, high stakes, and genuinely unclear. That's not a character flaw, that's a mechanism. And mechanisms, once named, can be interrupted. The thing worth carrying from this, the sentence worth holding, is not a step or a tool. It's this. The disorientation you've been living in is the correct response to a genuinely unprecedented pace of change. It is not evidence of inadequacy. It is not yours to carry alone. And it is not permanent. You didn't fall behind. The ground moved. And now you know what was moving, and why, and what one small thing looks like next. That's not everything. But it's enough for before Tuesday.